Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Has anybody here worked at a hospital? If so, what was the spookiest thing you ever experienced there? Op here. I'll start off with one of my stories. I worked tech support at a high-tech new hospital with robots that served food for patients. PIC-related. Hospital was set to open in a few days, so the robots were being taken on test runs. Me and one other guy are installing wireless access points on the ceiling, with him standing on a ladder, when one of the robots comes barreling down the corridor. It says, "Please stand aside," and then rams into the ladder. The guy I'm with falls down and breaks his leg. The robot zooms off. Not exactly paranormal, but it still messed me up. Almost got killed by a robot.
I've done IT stuff for hospitals, but nothing too creepy. Except the one time they wanted me to go in this one nurse's station to fix something. Fix. Get back up, and now all the staff are in hazmat-type suits. Oh, it's just a precaution. You should be perfectly fine. But you should probably leave now.
I was a porter. Always ended up moving the stiffs over to the morgue. Nobody told me when I started that dead bodies can fart, moan, wheeze, etc., and actually partly sit up due to gases. Not so much spooky as just biology, but still. The first time I damn near pissed myself. Also, there's this weird thing where patients will sometimes raise their arms up when they're brain dead or dying. The Lazarus reflex.
If you ever work in a crematorium, you can get the job where you have to look at the dead bodies being burned. They sit up. The heat causes the muscles to contract, and it just happens. It makes the corpses do that movement. A friend of mine said about how they often have to fill out extra reports when the bodies do something weird at the wrong time and come off the gurney because of new bruise marks and such.
My best friend's dad died in 1991. During an open casket wake, his body sat up but not quite fully right when the priest mentioned his name. It scared the bejesus out of everyone, and several screamed. The priest had to calm everyone down and explained it's a natural thing that happens sometimes. I used to have a coroner's assistant, the guy who picks up bodies for the morgue, as a regular customer back then. He said weird but perfectly natural things happen. He related one night hearing a banging, scraping noise coming from within one of the drawers. Obviously the body inside briefly moved around. No matter how natural, he said, it's always a bit unsettling to experience that.
That would be terrifying as hell. Do you live in a country where they don't routinely embalm bodies, or was it a special request to not have it done? Or can embalmed bodies still move?
Canada. And I believe they opted not to embalm, as they were putting him into the ground real quick. I think within 3 days of his passing.
While in the heart hospital, I swore I saw an old guy turn a corner just ahead of me while I was doing one of my walks. It was a long corridor where he turned, got to it, and no one was in sight. Also, one of the creepiest things were all the code blues I heard while waiting for my operation. One weekend, there must have been 5 codes in my little section of rooms. Freaked me out since my heart was on the edge at the time. I'm so fortunate to still be here. I love you guys.
Code blue is when someone dies? Do they announce it on the loudspeaker? I'm glad you're still here.
Cardiac arrest, and they announce it on the loudspeakers so the code blue team can hear to come running. There was a big blue button in each of the rooms that you had to slap pretty hard to activate. It sets off a blue alarm light outside the room and notifies the nurse's station, who calls the code blue out. That weekend of those 5 codes, you'd hear them call it and very quickly hear people running and a couple of carts being pushed down the hall. I'm so glad the hospital I was in had individual rooms, so I didn't have to witness anyone crashing like that.
Spent time in a hospital recently. Dude they had in the room with me was like a zombie. From the medications I heard them talking about, I could tell he was a hardcore alcoholic. Bastard kept me up all night because he kept taking out his catheters and trying to leave. The nurses were really cool people, though. Much appreciation for the people that have to deal with that shit. I was able to finally ride my bike again for a bit today. Thank you, hospital friends.
Nurses have to deal with so much crazy shit. Nice ones are pretty special. I couldn't deal with that job all day. And stay smiling.
I worked several years in a psychiatric ward. One day, a schizophrenic patient was sleeping, and in one instance, there was breathing in my left ear and singing a lullaby. Then my policy changed to not sleeping on the night shift.
I've been a patient in a psych ward before, and the actively schizophrenic patients are the most disruptive people there. There was one guy who was haunted by voices of his family telling him that he's the reason his brother was locked away for life. We'd just be chilling, watching TV, and he'd start crying and shout, "Fuck off, I'm sorry, bro," out of nowhere. I'm schizoaffective, so lucky for me, I can make the connection that what I'm hearing isn't real. But usually if I feel the need to respond, it just sounds like annoyed blubbering to most people. If I have headphones in, can it look like I'm miming to a song. Also, there was one time that I was in the emergency ward for attempting self-termination. And as I was laying in bed, across from me was this old lady and a dude and chick over her, and the chick was crying. The guy was making a bunch of phone calls, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. And then the tea and coffee lady comes past and offers everyone drinks. She looks into each little cubicle thing and says, "Any tea or coffee?" She does this for me first, and then leans into the room opposite of me with the couple and the old lady. "Tea or coffee?" The crying lady responds with, "No thanks." "No, I meant for the patient." "She's dead." "Oh, sorry." I don't think the tea lady stopped at anyone else's cubicle in our hallway. I was 2 meters away from a dead lady and her grieving daughter. The daughter's husband makes calls to the family about the car crash the old lady had been in.
Does most of it present as voices or as auditive contamination? Knocks on doors, people walking, etc.
Auditory hallucinations are more common than visual ones, but although sometimes visual ones can make you question if you really did see a pair of legs with no torso, or if it was just your eyes tricking you, auditory ones are distinct. I have heard friends and family scream out my name in pain when I'm all alone, telling me I'm going to accidentally do some physical thing before it happens. Falling down stairs, almost tripping into oncoming traffic, that kind of stuff. Luckily, most audible hallucinations I have are just annoying, not particularly sinister.
My best friend had a freak heart attack. Me and a group of his friends go to the ICU to visit him. Walking through and seeing all the people in the ICU who are probably going to die, hear ominous singing. A little girl was singing Silent Night as creepily as possible down the hall. If that were a horror movie, it would have been some serious foreshadowing.
I had to go to a hospital for an appendix CT scan. Random woman comes to my room and says it's time for the scan. Can't walk to the scan room even though my legs work 'cause my protocol. Wheel me down some creepy, cold, green and blue hallways with no people, just a bunch of ominous doors that say biohazard and stuff. Reach the scan room and there's 2 people in front of me. One of them is one life support which sounds like a vacuum cleaner turning on and off. Try to ignore it. Pretty freaked out. I'm visibly shaking at this point. Wheel him out and the next person comes in apparently for some heart-related reason. Codes on the damn machine and a bunch of people come rushing to her and wheel her out to God knows where. I'm next in line. Go in, technician, and I say hi and stuff, small talk really, ask him how many times a person dies on the machine, says very rarely, but it still happens. They scan me and wheel me back to my room, take a creepy elevator with fluorescent lights this time. The surgery went fine, but the whole experience of seeing people at death's door really traumatized me.
You get used to it if you're around it for long enough. There are still cases where I actually start to think about life and death and all that jazz. The conclusion I usually draw is, I hope I die before I become like that.
I hear ya. I spent 99 days at the Foothills NICU, neonatal ICU, in Calgary, Alberta, and I watched newborns die. and saw things like 5-year-old girls dying from leukemia, an old person's disease. It changes ya.
EMT here. Delivered a patient to the 3rd floor of a hospital. Elevators are always slow. Really slow. Out of 4 elevators, at least 2 are exclusively used by hospital staff with priority ride keys. Decide to look for a different elevator. Make my way through the corridors. No clue where I am at that point, but at least there's an elevator here. Flickering lights, dirt, rust, etc. in the elevator. It's a shit heap. Go down to ground level, exit elevator into some sort of Silent Hill murder space. Again, rust everywhere, stripped walls and everything. Have to make my way out of this creepy side wing of the hospital. It was scary. Had the whole cliché down, flickering lights, rusted shit everywhere. You know the works. Was still faster than my driver, who was waiting for the elevator though.
What the hell? Do most hospitals just have abandoned wings? If not, you may be brushing off what happened too quickly.
It's not abandoned, just under construction. It's an old hospital, and renovation is long overdue, which is also why they fixed the main elevators. It was just creepy either way, short angled corridors with stripped walls and no one around. Made me think of some horror movie I watched where they're stuck in some asylum, then escape back to their hotel only to end up back in the asylum when the doors of their elevator opens.
Huh. Every hospital seems to have one of those. Ours, a very tidy university clinic, had a basement floor that was sort of unfinished and full of random brick walls and tiny rooms without lighting or doors. It was always warm down there, so a friend went down there now and then to take a nap.
In 2003, wife's grandmother is in hospital stricken with cancer. It's her last moments. Both her daughters and my wife by her side. Oldest daughter, mother-in-law, holding one hand. About half a minute before passing away, her grandmother's attention shifts to an empty corner at the foot of her bed. She reached out with another hand and gestures to the seemingly empty corner. Everyone present follows her gaze. My skin crawls. Weakly, she says, "Mommy," and smiles, lays there focused on something invisible for several moments as if listening, lays her head back, closes her eyes, and quietly passes on. I remember having a weird urge to take a picture of the corner for some reason.
She was right on the verge of life and death, so she saw the other side right before passing over to it.
Not hospital-related, but I have a similar story. Last moments of my aunt at home, after battling cancer for 2 years. She spends her last days chatting with us and taking pics of her cat with her phone. Days after that, she dies. We are checking the pics she took. Last 4 or 5 photos, just minutes before her death, are of a wall. An empty wall just in front of her bed. Pics aren't taken at the same angle and don't seem to be focused on anything specific. Looks like the wall just was in the background of something else she wanted to take a pic of. Wonder what she saw.
I used to sit with my neighbor's dying mother when my neighbor would need to run errands. Just sit in the living room on my phone or read to make sure there wasn't a fire or something crazy. And in her final week, I could constantly hear her in the other room yelling at people who weren't there. She was telling them she didn't want to go swimming, and then that she didn't want to go with them, and kept crying. And then, a couple days before she died, she was talking to them like they were old friends and seemed really happy. That was probably the first time in my life I thought there may be something else after this. I still don't know for sure.
I never worked in a hospital, but I lived next door to one for 4 years while I was in uni. It wasn't rare for me to hear the ambulances go off at night. One night, however, after a night class, I was walking by and saw them bring an actual body on a stretcher. I felt like something followed me home after that. I had an eerie dream that night that the person on the stretcher, an elderly Asian woman, sat up from the stretcher and looked directly at me. It wasn't long after this that I actually heard in our local news that an elderly Asian woman was struck by a car and killed on scene. One of a few paranormal dream-type things that has happened to me, but kind of hospital-related, I guess. I should probably mention the body was covered when I saw it, but that's kind of a given.
I was going to start my own thread, but this works. I work as a security guard at a mental hospital from the 1800s. I'll share a few stories, PIC-related. I'll start with the small stuff. I've seen a Bible move across a table on its own. I've had radios turn off on their own when entering places like the chapel or an abandoned unit. I've seen silhouettes of people on the cameras or in the reflection of windows. I've heard strange noises on the radio like gargling or a girl laughing. Last night, I heard a baby crying for 10 or 15 seconds while I was on the top floor offices. It's a single hallway, so there is nowhere for a baby to be stored or hidden. Oh, almost forgot the time I was talking to a cleaning lady in dialysis and her cleaning cart started and continued moving up the sloped hallways on its own. Now for story 1. Security works in pairs on one specific ward in the hospital. I'm always with one guy who would sit by the door in the guard room with the lights off and be on his phone for a bit. Co-worker likes to stop the door with his foot when I open the door, just to be a shit disturber. Late evening, around 10:30 to 11 p.m. I go to change my radio's battery. I unlock the guard room and try to push open the door. It budges open a little, but then stops, as if someone's foot is on it. I decide to play with my co-worker, and I lean and put all my weight onto the door and push. Door shakes, but I can't overcome my co-worker's strength. I sigh and say, "Dude, just let me into the room." I hear the toilet flush from across the hall. Staff bathroom opens and a co-worker comes out, looks at me confused and says, "What?" I'm still leaning on the door as it suddenly stops pushing back on me. I fall into the guard room. Co-worker and I both proceed to nope out to the nursing station. On patrol tonight. Patrolling officers act alone on overnights, sit around the office for a couple hours, eat food and play emulators on the phone. Decide to finally go do a patrol. Get to the dialysis unit and go down a single dead-end corridor to hit one of the checkpoints I have to scan. Dialysis was very warm when I entered it. I debated taking off my work sweater. Out of nowhere, I get goosebumps and shivers. I suddenly feel freezing, as if I should have been wearing a winter jacket. Start leaving the hallway and get to the end door. The whole time it feels like there is someone 2 feet behind me staring down at my neck. Get to the end part of the ward, a section where there are lots of special chairs for the patients, each with their own little TV hanging in front of it. TVs all go from their channels to static as I start to feel freezing again. I'm now freaking out and rush off from the ward. I go up a flight of stairs to hit a checkpoint on way back down. A floor that had lights on was now pitch black. Go to the office to take a break from this. Notice the camera on the unit that turned its own lights off. There looks to be a phantom resembling an old man. I can see lots of detail, enough to see facial features like his nose, and I could tell his hands were in his pocket. My phone camera treated it like he wasn't even on screen. Decided to just leave it alone and go finish my patrol. I start to feel like I'm being followed again, but decide to just stop being a pussy and continue my patrol. I get to the chapel. I turn on the lights and walk up the hall that leads into the main chapel. As I get to the end of the hall, the lights flicker and turn off as it sounds like something heavy was sliding across the floor. Decided I'm a humongous coward and decided to go hang with the guard in the patient registry unit. I didn't finish my patrols or do anything else that night. My relief shows up. I tell her about my night but forget all about the old man on the camera. She tells me her story of a similar experience, in the exact same hallway of dialysis. Same feeling of cold and being watched up close. She mentions one thing that made me truly feel spooked. As she was leaving the unit, when she went to open the door, she looked into the glass window on the door. She said she could very clearly see an old man staring at her, expressionless, standing directly behind her. Spooky stuff happens here and it's not uncommon. A janitor found a rat king, a collection of dead rats all knotted together by their tails just the other week. People have quit on the spot because of their experiences.
Well, this happened to my dad. He's a pediatric doctor, and he had landed a job at this really old hospital in the city about a month ago. There's an elevator in the back half, and it's an employee-only elevator. It just got done with getting worked on just for routine checkups and stuff because it's an old one. Well, my dad was walking towards it and saw a patient open the door and was going to try to tell her that she can't get on there, especially because she was dragging around an IV stand. He called out and asked her room number, but when she turned around to look at him, she disappeared, and the IV bag and stand stayed there. My dad said she looked sort of like the typical meth addict. My dad called a nurse over to look at the stand and decided to use a different elevator. He later talked to his friend about it, and turns out she's pretty widely known around the office. They call her Mandy, but nobody actually knows who she is, and nobody's checked the records for her.
I had a big surgery in 2011 after 2.5 years of chemo. As I regained strength, I got to meet quite an interesting bunch of staff members. A doctor that I'm pretty sure beat a female coworker to get a fibromatosis surgery on its career records. A nurse that non-stop offered me drugs for the pain. I suspect she was looking for an excuse to ransack the supplies. But the most memorable one was the guy I shared my room with. An old dude from Paraguay who told me ultra-spooky stories, first in the hospital room, later on as we stretch our legs walking side by side in the hallways at night. The most unnerving one I remember is the one of the Vytu-viue, a monkey-like creature that stalks you at night. Their hair is absolutely black, but it's oily, so you can catch a glimpse of it if the moonlight or a rogue streetlight hits it right. But most certainly the first thing you'll see, just like he did, are its teeth. He saw it one night back in the 80s as he was waiting with other 2 workers for the company pickup truck that would take them from the woodcutters' camp back to town. It was just standing there, on the ridge of the jungle, with its eyes wide open in expectation, a grin on its face. The bottom teeth are overgrown and curved outwards. The legs are stubby and hidden amongst the fur. The creature is creepy and unnatural, but no bigger than 70 centimeters. He said he cursed himself when he realized what was going on, because the worst thing about knowing the legend of the Vytu-viue is that he knew how deadly are the consequences of the malice he places on you. He explained to me that the creature is cursed. It's an aberration of the night, and therefore it cannot come close to humans nor the human world. But the smell of fear is intoxicating, like adrenaline to it. The more it perceives it, the braver it feels, and the more he encroaches forward, and the closer he is, the bigger it gets when the malefice is at its summit. The Vytu-viue can get as big as 2 meters. At that point, it picks up the human by one of his legs with its unnatural apeish strength, and with a whip-like motion bashes it repeatedly against the ground until the leg dislodges, or only a pulp remains. It is said the Vytu-viue are not born with their gleeful smile, but rather that the ecstasy they get from their first murder freezes it like that forever. Well, anyways, he was absolutely scared shitless, but the 2 foremen that were waiting with him didn't know about the Vytu-viue and were laughing their asses off, speculating what deep jungle illegal drug compound had the monkey raided to get that fucked up, and their laughter was so contagious, it basically saved his life.
X-ray tech here, working in a small town in southern Oregon. Around these parts, we have certain people who live out in the boonies who keep to themselves and their family, only coming into town for supplies. Real disgusting folks. Remember, please don't smoke, drink, or smoke meth when you're pregnant. Occasionally, we'd get 1 or 2 in the ER with abdominal pain or some shit, and they'd have a family member with them. 10 out of 10 times, they smell like they sleep with goats and sheep, and always have a dead look on their face when you talk to them. All generally borderline mentally disabled. Nothing scary about them being in my hospital, but I know all sorts of nasty shit goes on out in the hills. Christian, assaults, lots of drugs. Occasionally drifters get murdered. State welfare workers generally don't go out there unless they have a county Mountie escort them.
I worked in a nursing home for a while. Old people who just lie around waiting to die, lose control of bodily functions, are a bit creepy in a sad way. It could be you, but not really paranormal. The dementia hallucinations are borderline spooky, though. One old man who had really bad dementia would always fuss when we were getting him ready in the morning, saying we weren't doing it right, whatever we were doing, from helping him piss to serving breakfast. Not being able to specify what exactly was wrong, just saying, "It's not right, it's not finished, it's not prepared yet," etc., etc. He was being like this all the time, but one day got worse. He was more specific than I'd ever heard up to that point, pointing and gesturing and going, "It's not correct over there, the thing. Over there, the thing with the thing, it's not right," etc., on and on. Just in the days after this kind of escalation of his dementia, he was taken to the hospital. I don't know why, but probably from physical issues. since if it was just that he was getting more crazy, they would probably move him to a home for dementia patients, and died pretty much immediately. I've heard a lot of patients say things that are obviously hallucinations, but it kind of freaked me out to imagine what it's like to live as that man, constantly upset and anxious about something, yet not being able to explain what. Wonder if he knew what was wrong but couldn't say or didn't really know.
I work on a dementia and geriatric psych unit overnight. We get that all the time. We also get old women with schizophrenia that are awful and creepy to have. Working overnight, disturbed sleep is a major thing with dementia clients and psych patients in general between their condition, their environment, and their medications. One schizophrenic lady around 80 or so would just lurk in the shadowy corner of her room right near the doorway. It was far enough back that you really couldn't tell that anyone was in there unless you let your eyes adjust a little. She would always be watching you or anyone else near her, but never slept during the night and only barely caught up during the day. We have to check up on patients every 15 minutes, and additionally on the overnight need to tap a little wand to a metal nipple on the wall far inside the room as a sensor so that our bosses know we're doing our job and checking on our patients. I checked on that lady every 15 minutes, but hell if I was going in there and putting her between myself and the door.
My grandpa passed away 5 years ago after taking a pretty sharp turn during the last 2 years of his life. He went from one of those old dudes who do everything on their own, being badass going to gun ranges. He would go to Hardee's every morning to meet up with his friends to have breakfast. When I was little and didn't have school, I went with him, up until he got too sick to leave the house. To rely on my mother and I coming over to help him up off of his chair so he could use the bedside toilet. We lived just down the road. One night, Pop fell out of his chair and was complaining of hip pain. We took him to the hospital to get checked out since he was a lot more frail than he used to be, naturally. One thing you should know is that Pop hated hospitals with a passion. He'd say, "You'd just as likely come out dead than alive," fairly commonly. Well, as my mom and aunt got his room squared away, I sat with my grandpa and asked him, "Other than this whole ordeal, how are you doing?" What he said next will never leave me for as long as I live. Looking at me dead in the eye and gripping my hand, he told me, "I've just been so disgusted in myself. You're my grandson, Bucky. You shouldn't have to take care of me like this. Can I shoot straight with you?" "Yeah, Pop, you know you can. I'm gonna go tonight. You will be rewarded." He passed that night in his sleep. Not really spooky or anything, but his words haunt me to this day.
I remember I had a patient who went into full cardiac arrest on me while we were something like 2 minutes away from the hospital. 1 minute she was talking to us and then boom, no respirations and no heartbeat. We were so close to the hospital at that point, the medic didn't have time to drop a combat tube or something, so he asked me to place an OP airway and start compressions. Anyway, we got her into the hospital bed and went about finishing up paperwork for the call. We found out from our OPS manager who was inside with another crew that they pronounced her. The messed up part of the call was that she had originally called for her husband who was taken by another crew. She started feeling sick too, so we got called to come get her. Knowing that man was going to wake up without his wife hit me kind of hard.
Mum worked at the local hospital here, which is ancient. One elevator in particular, the doors would get stuck open and close after the feeling of someone brushing past you. Every night in the old short-stay ward at a particular time, there would be the stench of rotting flesh. It would go away if one of the nurses told Frank to leave. The operating theatre too was known for having random noises and scalpels and other small instruments thrown around and at staff. I personally was in that hospital as a child with appendicitis. It was creepy. The floorboards creaked when no one was walking around, seeing reflections in the windows out of the corner of your eye which were gone when you looked at them. Just a generally very spooky old hospital. The wiring is so bad in it that there are no TVs for patients because they have been known to blow up. They need to just demolish it and start again.
Heart attack, stenting, and follow-up double bypass. The stay in the hospital room alone. Room, bed, 9 days, 120,000. Surgery was $80,000. The stenting that failed was $25,000. Then there were all the assorted doctors, specialists, etc. Oh, the room fee didn't include the 2 days I spent in post-surgical care, sort of like the ICU. Not really spoopy, but just advice. If you ever are in the hospital, don't be afraid to speak up for your rights, or if you think something is wrong that they're not seeing. I'm the one from above who had a heart attack and was in a heart hospital. Before the surgery, I was having some shortness of breath, as I was having another mild heart attack while in the hospital. The RN for me came in, I told him my symptoms, and he brushed it off as me just being anxious. Anxiety is one of the symptoms of a heart attack, by the way. He didn't want to bother the doctor overnight in case it turned out to be nothing, as he might get in trouble. He actually said that. My wife jumped all over him and got the RN from the adjoining set of rooms. She was all over my symptoms, ordering tests and contacting the doctor. I don't know what happened to the other RN, but I never saw him again the time I was there.
Sorry, no green text. This is very personal and I can't focus on making it into a green text. Even without anything paranormal happening, witnessing somebody battling cancer can be disturbing. I was really fucked up in my head for years from witnessing my grandmother wither away, screaming in pain for hours and losing all dignity as a human being. Even after years after her death, I still cannot completely accept the horrible reality of it. This was happening daily as she lived with my mom and me and we were taking care of her. In the last months of her life, she sometimes slipped into insanity and back. For example, she thought she still had her glasses on and tried to put them down even when we were holding them before her. However, her brain scan was completely clean, so it was maybe from all the opiates she was taking to alleviate her suffering. I remember both my mom and me were in the living room with her and she said, "Hey, Palo, long time no see." Palo was a nickname of her deceased partner and my mother's father. I can only remember how sad the moment was. In the last days, her condition was so bad she had episodes of breath so shallow she had to go to the hospital. I remember the day before she died, we were standing around her hospital bed and she sat and looked through us and simply said, "Palo, why are you just standing back? Come join us."
So, your grandpa, why can't you directly refer to him?
He died before I was born and they weren't married. My mom was 17 at the time. He was a doctor and a skilled hunter. When I am in any of the towns he worked in and people see or hear my name for any reason, they ask me if I am related to him and they always show great respect. From the stories and photos I saw, I feel a tangible respect as well. I am sad I never met the man because I think I would be a better person today. The irony is that he had a cardiac arrest, so he drove to the nearest hospital as fast as he could and said what exactly they needed to administer him. The young, inexperienced doctor panicked and my grandpa died.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.